Got a reasonably deep and profound letter here that I'm probably going to have a fairly brief and shallow response to, but I appreciate all this kind of email. I'm sorry if the lighting is strobing in and out. I'm doing the best I can. You know, Morty's on vacation. The regular lighting tech isn't here. We got a bunch of interns from the Kunming School of Video Production helping out at à-bas-le-ciel Broadcasting Network. I don't know what it is, but hey. Hopefully you're not here for the video quality and strobe lighting effects. The letter goes as follows. This is from one of my many Patreon supporters. Thank you, people who pay $1 a month to keep this kind of content being created. And by the way, that $1 a month, it may not sound like much money to you if you live in scenic southern Texas, where the cost of living is very high, but it is actually a lot of money to me because I live in Kunming, China, where my salary is abysmally low. Anyway, okay, so the letter goes as follows. My wife is starting a vegan food stall with a view to a cafe/diner in the future. She appreciated your remarks in the recent video on short-term versus long-term goals in veganism, etc. So that video, I think, was uploaded yesterday. I'm wondering if you could offer advice on what I'd call, quote, the acquisition of perspective, close quote. A lot of your videos seem to draw heavily from past experiences and the perspective those experiences give you. For some of us, living in one country, working in one industry, knowing only one major religion in your area, etc., can really inhibit your ability to have a worldly perspective. Not to say that permanent vacationists are somehow wiser, LOL, but I hope you know what I mean. I don't think it's reasonable to tell everyone to live overseas for a time, so there has to be an alternative. For me personally, I'm acutely aware of examples where I lack perspective. Indigenous history and issues in Australia, for example. I care deeply about them, but I'm not well versed in them. I can fix that, and I've been working on that lately. My next door neighbors are an indigenous family! ! Deforestation in Southeast Asia, though, where the fuck would I start? A lot of the well-rounded, useful knowledge and perspective on issues like that really can't come from Google skills, he says. I feel, but I'm open to disagreement. End of sentence. Thought that was the middle of the sentence, but that was the end of the sentence. He's open to disagreement. I could go on with examples, but I think, quote, the acquisition of perspective in pursuit of improving your knowledge and reasoning on specific topics and on all topics is pretty universally important. Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me a question that is so meaningful and substantive that I'm now going to embarrass myself by giving you a relatively short and catty answer. And I'm wearing the worst t-shirt for this too, right? It's the t-shirt. Yeah. So look, I'm going to be 100% honest with you because that's my steez. You can meet people who've been all around the world and they come back just as ignorant as they were when they started on the journey, right? It's depressing and soul-crushing, but it's true. And maybe that is one of the things you only learn by actually going out and traveling around the world in person. You might assume that people who are worldly, that people who have those tremendous experiences, whether in business or in tourism or otherwise, that they, inevitably they become wiser or they get a more balanced and profound appreciation for what life is. Nothing could be further from the truth. Very often, I mean, this is one of those things where you only see things when you're willing to see them. You only tend to, recognize what it is you're looking for. I mean, I'll use an example that came up in a recent video. In my video that was fairly popular about the use of soap, there was this guy who disagreed with me on that, who believed in so-called natural hygiene, a vegan who refused to use soap. And his evidence to support his view of the world was that when he was in India, he said the peasants in India, the poor people in India, they don't use soap and they're all healthy all the time. They don't have any health problems. Now, you mentioned here the contrast to Google skills. You could very rapidly and easily, through Google skills, discover exactly what health problems people have in rural India, poor peasants have, or poor people in general have in India, right? Google skills could reveal that immediately. Going to the library, book learning, could give you that kind of background very quickly and easily. But you'd have to know to ask the question. You'd have to know why it mattered. You have to know that you were interested to ask the question. And on the other hand, somebody can go to India and do humanitarian work and live amongst the poor and help the poor and hand out sacks of rice to the poor and never see the problem. They can just go there wanting to believe that India is paradise, maybe a spiritual paradise, maybe for some other reason. They're attached to a glamorized, glorified notion of what Indian society is supposed to be, and they don't see it at all. By the same token, people can travel around Laos and not see any of the problems with drug addiction. It's just a very typical example. They think these people are innocent and pure because they're living in poverty, and therefore they don't have a bunch of drug addicts going from town to town. They do. Laos, the whole country, has serious problems with drug addiction. Not surprising. They're human beings too, etc., etc. But if you're not looking for it, in a sense, it's not even there to be seen. I had a report. I did detailed research on HIV/AIDS. As I recall, this is from memory, but at the peak of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, the capital city of Cambodia, 1 out of 4 police officers contracted HIV/AIDS. It was quite a short period of time, but this decimated the police force. Everyone in the police force at that time, or everyone in a job in government, they would have known somebody, they would have met somebody who contracted AIDS and died of AIDS, right? Now, I'm sorry, that statistic is from memory. I could tell you the report that I got that from. It was detailed research, very interesting. Obviously, you can go there and see none of this, and on the other hand, you can go there and only see a bad stereotype of what's going on. You could go to Cambodia and think it's all violence and all poverty and all oppression, and you can go there and see none of these things. So, I mean, what you're really getting at with this question is, what is the relationship between empirical experience and research and learning and adapting your own perspective on the world? Now, really, the other anecdote I have to tell here is one that I mentioned in passing a very long time ago. But I do remember making the video, and I remember actually sending the link to my parents, because it was one of my few videos in which I said something nice about my father. Overall, I do not have a very positive relationship with my parents. But one of the few things, really wise things my father said to me when I was growing up, he discussed with me his theory, it's just his own little pet philosophy, of the difference between attitudinal learning and factual learning. Learning an attitude towards the world, an attitude towards facts, an attitude towards experience, as opposed to learning particular facts or having particular experiences. These are two fundamentally different things. And my father asked the question broadly, how do we actually approach attitudinal learning, right? Now, the example he chose is an example that means a lot to me. If you guys don't know, I'm a former student of Cree and Ojibwe, involved with First Nations politics, languages. It's something I care about. I'm not an expert, but it's something I enrolled in a university program to study. It's something I care about, something that means a lot to me. The example my father actually used at that time was Native Americans, aka American Indians, First Nations. He said, you can take someone and show them an archaeological site, the remains of a destroyed indigenous civilization. Do they learn particular facts? Do they learn what year this was built, or what year it was destroyed, or when the Europeans showed up and killed everybody? Is that what matters? Maybe what really matters is a shift in attitude of trying to get across to people. These people lived here thousands of years ago. Their history matters. They have their own history. They have their own story to tell. And it's important and meaningful in its own way, right? Maybe what you're trying to, that's not even a fact. You're just trying to get an attitudinal shift so that people who maybe showed up just with a stereotype image that they had from cartoons or from primary school, from their school education, where they just imagine native people are sitting around a campfire with no civilization of their own, to have a shift in attitude towards appreciating these people did have their own civilization. And then again, that can lead to people asking questions, and that can lead to people doing original research. I guess I'll throw in a third anecdote that I think I've never told here before. I remember exactly who it was who said this, and I'm choosing not to say his name. But I went to a lecture on a university campus, and this guy, I appreciated his honesty in at least this regard, this anecdote. Many of the things he said were dishonest. But anyway, this guy gave a long lecture, and then there were questions from the audience at the end. And in response to one of the questions of the audience, he said, look, when I was a kid, I was a snob. And he said, I went up to an elite Jesuit priest to ask this question, because I didn't want to ask my local parish priest. I didn't want to ask some local lowly representative of the Catholic Church. I went to this elite Jesuit, highly respected, and he had a PhD or something. He was some celebrated scholar of the Bible. And I asked very simply, he was a child at the time. He said, "How can I find God?" And the Jesuit's answer was to laugh. I assume it was a very contented and happy laughter. He laughed, he put his hand on the child's shoulder and replied, "The fact that you are looking means that he has already found you." Now, you guys know I'm not just an atheist. I am a nihilistic atheist, and I'm a nihilistic atheist that does not have much patience for the Catholic Church and its history of atrocities, etc., etc. However, I think it's very interesting that we could actually take that reflection and apply it to this question, but deleting God from the equation. The fact that you're searching, the fact that you're looking for God, the fact that you're searching, but it's not God we're talking about here, that already is actually the most fundamental thing, right? That's exactly what you can't teach people. That's what people can't learn when they buy the airplane ticket, and they can't learn on the airplane, and they can't learn when they get off the airplane. And after they get off the airplane, it doesn't matter if they go to the beach or they go to the Buddhist monastery. If they didn't already have the question, and in a sense also, to be honest, if they didn't already have the methodology for how to find the answer, to how to search, then they're going to get nothing out of it. All right, so here's an anecdote I'm absolutely certain I've never told on the internet before. I got an email once from a guy, and he was talking to me because he was interested in Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy. And he had just made an extensive tour, an extensive trip around Buddhist monasteries of Thailand. And in his tour, he asked one Buddhist monk after another at highly esteemed but foreign-friendly monasteries, what exactly does the Buddha say about emptiness? What exactly is the Buddhist philosophy of no soul? I think that was the whole question. Was what exactly is the Buddha's teaching on this fundamental issue? And nobody could give him an answer. And he summarized for me and discussed the evasive answers that the different Buddhist monks gave him. And some of the Buddhist monks, or I guess many, ultimately, they referred him to other Buddhist monks. They said, okay, well, I can't answer your question. You can go to this other Buddhist monastery and ask this other Buddhist monk. So in some ways, this guy had a delightful vacation. He went from one Buddhist monastery to another in Thailand, asking the same philosophical question again and again. What actually is the Buddha's teaching on emptiness and on no soul, i.e., that there is no soul? But in another sense, he had a very dissatisfactory vacation because nobody could answer his question, and not even remotely. It's not even like they gave the wrong answer. None of the Buddhist monks felt confident to even do the Google searching, to put it that way, and present him with something. Now, given the whole context of the conversation I had with the guy by email, I am actually 100% confident that he was really being honest with me, and he was describing. He was naming the monasteries he went to and everything, and his story, in many ways, it was entirely believable to me. And I remember when I told this to a former Buddhist monk, a retired Buddhist monk, because to me it was indicative of the level of textual ignorance of scripture, even in these supposedly elite Buddhist monasteries in Thailand. I remember this Buddhist, ex-Buddhist monk, retired Buddhist monk, said to me, he said, I don't believe it. He said, I don't believe the story. He said, there are so many Buddhist monks who know about, that kind of Buddhist philosophy and talk about it all the time, and no, it's not believable to me. I said to him, wrong. Because he didn't ask for the monk's opinion. He asked, what is the Buddha's teaching on this? He didn't ask for a sermon. He didn't say, can you improvise a lecture on philosophy to me the same way you would for a bunch of peasants in Thailand? Right? He said, I want to know what the Buddha actually said or what the Buddha actually taught on this issue. And he asked in English. He also wasn't asking in Thai, which is probably in some ways more intimidating, right? That this guy actually has to go and get, like a Bible scholar. He's got to get the page number. He's got to actually find out. And none of them can do that. That's what they can't do. It's not that they can't bullshit you. It's not that they can't improvise a lecture, right? So to me, again, this may seem like a veered very far off from the original question, but in terms of this, most fundamental matter of how do we gain perspective on things, in this case, you have to understand the question, you have to understand who you're asking, how you're asking, where the information comes from, and even the sets of methodology that are related to the answer. Now, I recognize this is not the answer you were probably expecting from me. I think most people would approach a question of this kind with a set notion that they had since childhood of what cultural sophistication means. And most of us, whether you grew up rich or poor or middle class, you probably had parents or grandparents or somebody inculcate into you, this is what it means to be cosmopolitan, this is what it means to be well-educated, this is what it means to be sophisticated. And maybe that involved listening to classical music, or going to the ballet, or reading Shakespeare, or maybe it included traveling to France and Italy. Maybe it included traveling to Japan. There was some list of places, of things you should do. Maybe it included seeing the pyramids in Egypt, but maybe it just included going to some famous museum in London or Paris. Maybe there was some schedule of things inculcated into you where you were told, if you do this, or if someone has done these things, they are to be respected and esteemed as worldly and cosmopolitan and as having these kinds of attitudes. But I think on a very deep level, the whole direction I've taken in this answer reflects the fact I'm a nihilist. I'm not just nihilistic in relation to organized religion. It's not just that I reject the existence of the Judeo-Christian God. I reject all of these cultural assumptions. To me, that whole line of thinking is bullshit and it's poison, and it's ultimately based on nationalism. And I think it holds a lot of people back. And I think every year people buy airplane tickets and buy books and buy library cards, and I think they try to act out that kind of cultural programming they've received of what it means to be a refined person or a sophisticated person, what it means to have that kind of perspective on the world. But there is no such simple formula. There is no such simple answer. And in the same way that, you can drive past the signs of poverty in your own neighborhood without ever noticing them, the way you can ignore the epidemic of drug addicts in your own neighborhood, you can also go to Thailand, go to Laos, go to Myanmar, and ignore all of the current social problems. And you can go to really an ancient archaeological site and totally miss not just the significance of those remains regarded in isolation in themselves, but you can miss what the lesson is for you now living in the 21st century. Those are very, very hard things to construe and very, very hard things for me to speak about prescriptively. But in your case, for the guy asking this question, he gives the example of deforestation in Southeast Asia. I can be like that Jesuit priest and say, hey, the fact that you're asking the question means that you already have the most fundamental of answers. The fact that you're searching means that, the truth has already found you.